Health and Fitness with David Hollywood.
With DS Sports, the teamwear specialists. Lightning fast delivery and unbeatable service at dssports.ie.
Good evening and welcome to Health and Fitness. Kamron Clarke here, filling in for David Hollywood, who's off enjoying a well-deserved break, probably doing something which would usually go against what he preaches on this show. But we will hear from him a bit later on, actually. Nonetheless, we have a great show lined up for you on Midlands 103. We'll hear about the potential consequences if the state doesn't put extra funding behind women's soccer. And we'll be talking about why there are calls for sweets packets to be plain. But first on the show, we all know exercise is great. If it wasn't, a show like this probably wouldn't exist. But do you know about the importance of rest? Are you taking the right amount of rest in between exercising? Are you taking too much rest? Well, Dr. Diane Cooper is a clinical exercise physiologist and the CEO of EduFit. She joins me on the show this evening. Diane, what are the benefits of resting?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm delighted you picked up on that article. So resting is actually where the magic happens, and I think a lot of people don't realise that. And if you were to actually ask me where people go wrong mostly in training, is that they don't see rest and recovery as essential, and it's often omitted from training plans. But basically, the rest and recovery phase is where all the adaptations happen. So if we take a 4-week cycle of training, so you're training hard and you're pushing we call it the overload phase for the first 3 weeks, and kind of towards the end of that overload phase you kind of start to you're feeling tired and a bit stiff and sore, and you've been really training, and then we'll say in the 4th week you take your recovery week. Now that doesn't mean you do nothing. It means that you either reduce the number of sessions that you're doing, or you keep the same amount of sessions but you'll make them a little bit easier, or you'll just do something completely different to let your body recover. And this is the time where all the adaptations take place. So this is where the muscle cells restore themselves. This is where for example, if you're doing strength training, it's where you get the strength gains because you've let yourself recover. Or if you were doing a running event, it's where you benefit from all of your hill work and your interval work and stuff. So basically that's where you get fitter or stronger or whatever it is that you're working on in training.
So when we say rest, there's a few different levels of rest that we need to take into account. The most common, I think, for everybody who does any sort of exercise would, they'd know a rest day, which is, take a day off from whatever your respective exercise is. But there's also rest, say if you're in the gym, there's resting in between sets. If you're an athlete, resting between sprints, resting between drills, that sort of thing. How important are those little aspects of rest, the 1 or 2 minutes in between moving on to another exercise?
Yeah, so it's kind of the same thing, but obviously it's immediate. So so what we were just talking about there is like a training cycle. So it's over a long period of time, right? But if you don't put that rest period in, your body just becomes more and more fatigued. And what happens over time is you lose force output, or your speed starts to reduce and things like that. But if you take a single session where you might be doing, say, sprint intervals, like you mentioned, right? So you'll do your sprint. It uses a particular energy system, it uses a particular source of fuel, and it needs a certain amount of time to recover before you can reproduce another high quality sprint. And the easiest way to see how it works is if you do a sprint and you take adequate recovery, and then we'll say you do another sprint followed by adequate recovery, and we'll say in total you have 10 sprints in your session. If you get the recovery right, the quality of each of the sprints should be fairly equal, and they should be fairly equal time-wise. So you should be hitting a fairly consistent target with your sprints, depending on the distance of the sprint. But if you do a sprint session and you fail to allow enough recovery, what will happen is you're in a constant state of fatigue, and basically the sprints get worse the more the session goes on. So say it took you 10 seconds to do the first sprint, you will see by the end of the session it's taken 11, 12, 13 seconds. And what's happening there is you're working in a fatigued state. You haven't allowed for enough recovery, so therefore the quality of this subsequent sprints is poor. And it would be the same in the gym, like you mentioned the gym. If you're doing proper strength work or proper power training, and you don't leave enough recovery time between sets, you're going to end up with the same thing. You'll struggle. You won't be able to lift the weight you were lifting. You won't get as many reps, or, you won't have that speed that is required in power lifting, for example. So basically what happens is, if you don't allow enough recovery, regardless of what you're doing, the quality of the subsequent effort diminishes. That's really that's the telltale sign that you haven't allowed for enough recovery.
So with that in mind, is it possible to have too much rest? Obviously, without getting into the exaggerated stages of resting to the point where you don't do it again. But, can you hit a point of diminishing returns where you're resting too much?
Within a single set, so do you mean a single session, or like in a training cycle, like a long term over a period of a few weeks?
Well, we'll start with both. So let's say you're in a training cycle. Okay, you've got warmed up. You've done, say, 3 of your sprints. You're aiming for 10, but you take an extended period of rest after that third sprint. Do you get to a point where your body cools down, and it starts to have a negative impact?
Yeah, but you know what? That happens potentially, but that happens so infrequently. Like, usually people are really focused. They have a certain amount of time to get the training session in. So we're talking about trained people here. Like, so they know the type of session that they want to do, and they know, like, they have X amount of time to do it in, and it's usually very carefully planned out. So you don't normally kind of see that. Where it comes into play in the training cycle is like, and again, when you're working with trained people, it's usually the opposite. They usually completely leave out recovery. It's not really even factored in properly. So it's usually actually the opposite. But where you'll see diminished performance is, just take, for example, if you have a beginner who has done, who's done a bit of training, and then they're not really consistent, and they end up losing kind of 3 or 4 weeks training for whatever reason, and then they go back into it, you'll see that the gains are reversed. Or typically where you would see it, whether you're a beginner or, highly conditioned person, where you'll see the effect of too much recovery is if someone gets a cold or a flu or something like that, and they're out of action for a few weeks. What will happen is, yes, of course, because you haven't been training, and rightly so, because you're ill. Let's just put that in there, because you shouldn't be training when you're that ill. Is that you'll see, when they come back to their first session, whatever that may be, whether it's a gym session or a run or whatever, they'll feel awful. They'll feel groggy. They'll feel much weaker, and they are, because they've lost training adaptations. But in that case, because it was due to maybe an injury or a cold or a flu, what will happen is, if they just give themselves a couple of sessions, take it easy for the first couple of sessions, like within 2 weeks, they'll regain all of that. And that happens to almost everybody at some point in the training year. It's completely normal. But if you're well conditioned, it's nothing to panic about. Let yourself get over the injury or the illness, and then within a couple of weeks, you're really back up to the level that you were before you took that time off.
Let's touch on that point you mentioned about, not training when you're sick. You get a flu, you get a cold, you're out for a week. Typically when that happens to me, I find it very hard to get back into the swing of exercising because I've taken that week or 2 weeks off. It kind of falls out of my routine. Is that a common thing that you'd see among people training? And how do you prevent, taking that rest when you need it? How do you stop yourself from feeling like you don't want to go back?
So a couple of things. If it's someone who has a particular goal, right? So we'll say it's a marathon runner and they have an 8-month program. Anyone who has a particular goal in mind, that's one of the biggest motivators to get back, right? And actually, you'll typically have the opposite problem where they won't want to take the time off, and they'll be pushing through injury and illness, which is an absolute disaster. And it just causes further problems for the body and for the mind. But and on that, actually, just people always say to me, like, how do you know whether you should or shouldn't train if you're ill? And I'll just give you a quick example of this. So generally we say if the illness is above the neck, so if it's in the head and the neck, right? So say, for example, you have sniffles, or you're not feeling 100%. What you do there is you do your warm-up. If you want to train, you do your warm-up. And if you start to feel better after the warm-up, then go ahead and train. But obviously don't do a really intense session. Just do some type of a maintenance session. But if the illness is below the level of the neck, so if it's systemic, so if you're feeling awful and if you have aches and pains and temperatures, you do not train, because that is potentially harmful. So we kind of call it the neck rule, whether it's either above or below the neck. But then the other side of it is, like what you mentioned, we'll say if you didn't have a particular goal, you're not training for something, maybe you're just training for health, which is myself at the moment, and you're kind of struggling to get back into the routine of it. One of the things I would always do is, and thankfully in my circle I have plenty of people to rely on, but we call it the buddy system. So I'd say, look, for whatever reason, illness or deadlines or whatever, I'm really struggling just to kind of get back into the system of training. So I'll actually just give someone a shout and say, look, will you meet me for a run or a gym session or whatever it is? And you find for people who are in a habit of training for lifestyle, you'll find that once they get 1 or 2 sessions under their belt, then they're away on a hack. So the buddy system is brilliant. If you have anyone in your circle that you can give a shout out to, just arrange to meet someone, and that accountability, getting 1 or 2 sessions under your belt, and you'll be away then after that.
So we've talked about the benefits of taking enough rest, and we've talked about what could maybe be the consequences of taking too much and falling out of that routine entirely. How do we go about finding the sweet spot? Okay, let's say you've worked out your arms, you've done your sprints, so obviously your legs or your arms are sore. Do you need to wait until those parts of your body are at 100% before you train them again? Or is there a point where, there's still maybe a little bit fatigued? Can you go back in without seeing diminishing returns?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of, we're talking quite generically at the moment, right? So it obviously depends on how trained the person is. It depends on the type of training they do and so on, right? But if you have it, and it depends on the session. So if I do something that's requires not to make it too complicated, but you know what the DOMS are, delayed onset muscle soreness, right? So they are the aches and pains that you do a session, you're absolutely fine after the session, but either the next day or even 2 days later, you have severe muscle soreness. You have it because you're really struggling to if getting in and out of a chair, for example, is excruciating, right? So we call that DOMS. And in that case, now this is proper exercise-induced muscle soreness. You'd get this from things like downhill running, or you'd get it from competing in a race, or you'd get it from a really intense strength conditioning session. And in that case, if you have severe DOMS, then we say, yes, you need to let that rest, because DOMS, basically, if you have that level of pain, what it means is you've quite significant tears in your muscle fibers. It is a normal part of training. It happens at various points in the training year, but you need to give yourself enough rest that you're at least walking normally without pain. So in those cases, you have to have potentially 2, 3, 4 days of complete rest, right? But obviously you don't do that much intensive training all of the time. But if we go back to just your normal training week, usually, regardless of what discipline you're doing, usually you'll have a hard session in your week somewhere. And in those cases, there's a very easy rule that we use in training, and we call it the hard, easy rule. So some people who are well conditioned can train twice a day, 6 days a week, and they can recover from it very, very well. But to give a very generic approach that will kind of cover everybody, we talk about the hard, easy rule. So if you've done a really tough session on a particular day, and you might not necessarily have that severe muscle soreness, but certainly you have muscle fatigue, the simplest way to keep yourself well is the following day you do a very gentle session, or you take a rest day. So it's a hard followed by an easy. And if you just do that, regardless of whether you're a beginner or intermediate, advanced, whatever, elite, that will at least, it's like an active recovery. It will let you recover, and then the next day you can push on again. What we don't do is bunch hard sessions one after the other, because all you're doing is fatiguing yourself, and it becomes quite difficult to recover from it. So the hard, easy principle is a really good way to look after yourself.
Dr. Diane Cooper has just given all the listeners an extensive guide into when you should rest, when you shouldn't rest, and when you should be able to get back at it. Dr. Diane Cooper, thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome. Thanks, Kamron.
And that was Dr. Diane Cooper, a clinical exercise physiologist and the CEO of EduFit. I don't know about you, but I feel like I should have a little lie down or something. maybe I'm not resting enough. Anyway, we'll plough on. Next on Health and Fitness on Midlands 103. Is there enough funding in women's soccer?
Health and Fitness
with DS Sports, the teamwear specialists. Experience lightning fast delivery and unbeatable service for all your sporting needs at DS Sports. With gear ready in as little as 5 days. Contact 085 87 15 311 or info@dssports.ie.
You're very welcome back to the programme. 27% more women are playing soccer since 2022. However, only a third of clubs have female toilets. Those figures from the FAI have prompted calls to improve facilities around the country and increase the funding for women's soccer. Longford Senator Micheál Carrigy joins me on the line this evening. Senator Carrigy, can I get your thoughts on these figures?
I suppose it's something I've been campaigning for a while for an upgrade on facilities, for our female sports people, and that's across, all sports. And I know we had a meeting with the Oireachtas committee, where we had, the GAA in and the three governing bodies within the GAA. We also had representatives from clubs, etc. And one of the major asks was, for significant investment needed to upgrade facilities. And we've seen within GAA, within soccer, massive increases in female participation. But the reality is we don't have the facilities to match. And there was a recent figure that came out there, particularly with regard to soccer, where only 33% of clubs actually have, female toilets. And I think, to be honest, it needs to be addressed. There's no point waiting for it to be addressed. There was a massive campaign there a number of years ago at the Sports Council, 2020 to say highlight from female participation. That campaign worked. Teams have sprung up across all sports, as I say, but the facilities don't match. And as I say, when I just seen that figure, 33% of clubs just had female toilets. We need to highlight the issue again, with regard to soccer. There's more than 27% more females playing soccer since 2022. Over 22,000 female players across the country. But the reality is we do not have the proper facility in place for them, and definitely for if we want to increase those numbers taking part. So I think it needs to be highlighted and addressed immediately.
With regards to that shortfall in facilities for women, is this a case where, as you mentioned there, we've seen this huge surge in the number of women playing soccer around the country? Like you said, 27% increase since 2022. Are we looking at a case where, obviously these clubs are older than that? They would have been, designed 20, 30 years ago. Are we looking at a case where they were designed with men in mind, that because obviously that was where the dominance in the sport was played before, and now they're just lagging behind and not catching up with this surge in new female participation?
Well, that's the fact, and I know I've seen it in facilities throughout the country and in other sports. That is the reality. It was completely built for men because there weren't female teams in those areas. There wasn't female soccer teams. There wasn't female GAA teams, and as I said, it wasn't taken into consideration. Now we've seen, as I say, a massive upshift. You said the 27% in soccer since 2022, and that is going to increase. Our national soccer team, ladies soccer team, is operating at a fairly high level within world soccer, so it's going to increase. So it's only right that we have the proper facilities in place, and that facilities are on an equal basis for male and female. It's not the case at present.
Are we at risk of turning women away from the sport if these facilities aren't going to match what they may see on the men's side?
Yes, I think that's the reality of it. Some will pull away from it if they're not seen to be getting a fair crack of the whip and having the proper facilities. We've seen what the ladies teams in a number of sports have had to do in recent years to get the same support levels to allow them, I suppose, maximise their potential. So the reality is, if we don't have proper basic, and that's what I mean, basic toilet facilities in place, people and young female athletes are not going to continue to participate in the sport. Where, as I said, that something so basic as that is not in place.
Your call isn't just in relation to facilities, toilets, changing rooms. You've also said that there needs to be development of new facilities, all-weather pitches, training centres, that need to make it easier for women to stay in the sport and, more importantly, train in Ireland? Because we've seen, we'll say, the likes of Katie McCabe, who are excelling abroad. They're not excelling in the domestic leagues in Ireland, but of course they're playing on the Irish international women's team. Without those facilities, the all-weather pitches, the new training centres where the money needs to be put in place, are we at risk of seeing all of our domestic players go to other countries to play because, in the most simple terms, the facilities elsewhere are better?
Well, that is the reality, and that is the reality at present. Like, we need academies across the country, be it in Athlone, be it in Longford Town, where we have League of Ireland, soccer clubs. We need to see a situation where we have a female team attached to all those leagues teams. But as I say, the basic thing of having proper facilities to train in the winter time, they're not in place. And I think we need to take a look. Sport Ireland need to take a look across the country and look at where facilities are, geographically located. We need a situation like they have in Europe, that a person is only a certain number of kilometres from a particular sporting facility. They have them spaced out around the country. So we need to look at it on a national basis. As I say, put proper 2024 facilities in place. To allow us build the game here in Ireland. And I think with the Euros coming here in a number of years, it's an ideal opportunity for what comes up. That investment has to go into the game here at a grassroots level. Put academies in place throughout the country. Make sure that we maximise the number of young, women, girls, and boys playing our sports. But we need proper facilities in place to make sure that they stay playing it, and ultimately, enhance the leagues here in Ireland, that we can keep more of our players playing in this country, not having to travel abroad. You
mentioned a statistic earlier on that there's 27% more women playing soccer across the country since 2022. That, of course, correlates with the women's national team and their historic qualification for the World Cup at the time. Are we at risk of running out of time on capitalising what was such an historic event and what's been an historic increase if we don't get this investment into place quick?
I think you are, and I said the other statistic what I gave to you earlier, that only 33% of the clubs have female toilets. We haven't caught on, and we haven't put the investment into that. Yes, it's great to have more people playing, but are they going to stay playing if that the proper facilities aren't in place? And I think we need to put that as a priority rather than investing into new facilities around the country. We need to upgrade what we have, what are already there, and where there already are girls' soccer teams in place. Get the facilities right where we have teams playing, rather than putting investments in other areas. And I put this to department officials. I spoke with Minister Byrne, and it was positive towards it. But we need to get the department officials, need to, make sure, that this is prioritised, and that's something I'm going to continue to call for until we can make it happen.
Fine Gael Senator Micheál Carrigy, thank you so much for your time. It's a very interesting conversation. I imagine the points you made are going to be agreed with by not only women playing soccer, but also those who have young kids who are looking to get into that sport as well. So thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
Next on Midlands 103, we'll hear from your usual host, David Hollywood.
Health and fitness
with DS Sports, the teamwear specialists. Experience lightning fast delivery and unbeatable service for all your sporting needs at DS Sports, with gear ready in as little as 5 days. Contact 085 87 15 311 or info@dssports.ie.
You're very welcome back to Health and Fitness on Midlands 103. You don't always hear my soothing vocals on this show. It's usually a mantle held by David Hollywood. He's supposed to be off at the moment, enjoying a well-deserved break. But it turns out he can't starve his loyal listeners for even a week. Have a listen to this.
Okay, I was just in Tullamore Town Park enjoying a day off here, and my 9-year-old runs up to me and says, "They're doing dancing over the bandstand. Can we go and do that?" And after about 20 minutes of intensive dancing, I've corralled a couple of people here. Dorinda, give us your full name and what you were doing here today. Tell us.
Hi, so my name is Dorinda Cahill, and I teach Zumba Dance Fitness. So I would teach in schools and do my own adult classes in the evening. So then Denise Denise got in touch with me, and we're trying to promote the her outdoor, just to get women involved in outdoor activities. So why not? On a lovely day like today, the sun is shining, so up we came and turn on the music and throw out the moves, and that's what we were doing. So it was great to get people involved, and that's what it's all about, getting outdoors and getting people and females active.
Okay. Yeah. And Denise, you're with Offaly Sports Partnership. Tell us what today was part of in the broader picture as well.
So today was outdoor dancing. It's part of Her Outdoors Week, which is a national campaign coming from Sport Ireland. So it's running all this week. I actually done a few days last week as well. So I done 2 days kayaking in Banagher and Belmount, and we're doing dancing today. There's chair yoga out in Dangan today. I'm on the kayaks tomorrow in Pulla and Shannon Harbour on Wednesday. There's more chair yoga out in out in Dangan tomorrow, and then there's activator poles in Muckla on Thursday. So there's a lot going on this week. It's all to encourage female participation in outdoor sports and just get females in particular active. But to be honest, if boys turn up, males turn up, we still want them active too.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, well, I was grateful for the right to act the absolute aegis. Yeah. And you must, Dorinda, observe in these classes that people approach with maybe a bit of hesitancy or awkwardness, but once you get into it, then it's it kind of all melts away and people start having fun.
Absolutely. Like once the music comes on and you're looking around, you forget about all that, what am I doing? It's just all about having a bit of fun. And as you say, like I know we're promoting females, I go to schools and the boys are just as much out there for it, because I know in schools not everyone's into their soccer or into their football or whatever, and it's amazing in the schools to see the boys and they're coming out and dance. So once you get one of them going, the whole lot of them follow, and it's great crack, it's great fun. You saw the young lad here today, and he nearly took my job from me. Do you know? Well able.
Dancing's an interesting one as well, because it can transcend all the generations. We can all do it, we can all get into it, and you can kind of choose your own tempo in a way as an individual. Talk to us about how you've observed how dancing helps people in their physical health.
Well, basically, I suppose you'd have the question straight away when people say, will I be able, is there a beginner's class? Will I be too old? Am I too young? And the answer is it's open to all levels. And as you say, you progress, you go with the music, you step it out, and you know what? You become kind of like a little family of friends. Everyone gets to know each other. You have your space there, and I think music just brings out the best in everyone, and everyone's going through different things and different hardships in their life, and I do definitely think everyone has a story in class where they've gone through something, and it's the dance and the music that got them out of that little bit of a hard place and just brought a bit more happiness into them and just let them just break away from that. So it's across the scale, it's for everybody, and it's just such a good feel factor from it, you know, and you come away after an hour and you're like, oh yeah, that was good fun, I'll definitely do that again, you know.
It's one of those things we kind of like interact with it from the womb to the grave in a way. Like it's always there in our lives.
If you go to any of the older adult country dancing, they're full every weekend, you know, so it's not just the youngsters, it's the music comes through in older adult life as well, you know.
Her Outdoors Week, I can only imagine it was brilliant timing that we had the 4x4 women's relay team, Rashida, with just inspiring everyone in the country, let alone Offaly. It's probably going to spur a lot of young girls into keeping up the sport.
Yeah, hopefully. It was absolutely brilliant to see them on a world stage and being so close. Fourth place is split seconds, you know, and to show that they can compete on the world stage. You know, they just missed out this time, but they'll get it the next time, you know, that they're there, and that's what Sport Ireland has done. That's what the investment in sport has done. They were talking about that today on the radio, you know, that by the next Olympics they're going to have a lot more investment into facilities, different things around the country, which is only going to be good and enhance physical activity everywhere throughout the country. You know, it'll make our job an awful lot easier as well, because I'm trying to promote physical activity throughout Offaly, so I cover all of Offaly, every community, every small area, just to get people more physically active but sustain it. You know, it's okay to put on 6-week programmes, but to try and get them coming, get them running stuff themselves.
That's it. It's about making it a lifestyle thing, isn't it? And that it's a habit. I've got a final question for each of you. Denise, I'll start with yourself. You're basically working to bring people into that healthy world of physical activity and that type of thing. So talk to me about like what that experience is like as a person, you know, to know that that's what you're doing. I would see it as a community service in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's brilliant. It's fantastic. I've always been involved in sport. I've played sport, every sport throughout my life, but I'm also a PE teacher. So I've carried through that, and I brought that into this job and into my community sports development officer. So I can go into an area, I can put on pickleball, I can put on badminton, I can put on dance, and put on anything, because you have to cater to who's in front of you and what they want and what their needs are as well. So it's having that variety, I think, is the most important thing when you're trying to encourage people to be active and to stay in a physical active life.
Yeah, because it doesn't have to be on the track or on a dance floor. It's just getting going and keeping going, as it were.
And enjoying it.
That's it.
Yeah.
And Dorinda, look, firstly, thanks for bringing the joy to today for us. I've definitely mortified my child. But yeah, look, kind of similar question for yourself then. You know, what do you get out of what you do for people? And when you're finished telling us that, tell us how people can find the classes that you're doing and look you up.
I've always loved dancing. I grew up with music at home, so my dad was involved in the band. There was music everywhere when we were growing up, and I suppose went to the Irish dancing, done all of the feshes, and then an opportunity came up. Zumba was being introduced all over, got very big in America, and I just saw an opportunity, and I said, okay, let's give this a go. And if 10 show up, great. If 20 show up, and just took off. That was back in 2020, and just went from there. 2000, should I say? And just kept going and going and going. And I thought I'll do it for another year if it keeps going. And yeah, so. But as you say, it just brings enjoyment when you put on the music. It's just it gives people this happy vibe. And yeah, so from there, that's what I done. I got introduced then into the schools as part of programs to keep the youngsters fit and happy and to do something that they like, and then started my own kept my own adult classes then going in the evening times. So I'm in the Midland Martial Arts Centre Wednesday for the minute during the summer, but I run a class on a Tuesday at 8 and Wednesday at 7:15 in the Midland Martial Arts Centre in the Tanyard. So
what should people look up on Google or whatever?
So I go under Zumba Dance Fitness with Dorinda, Dorinda. Yeah, so that's me.
Just when you think you've got a break from him, he starts dancing in the town park in Tullamore. Next up on Health and Fitness, our colourful sweets packets driving childhood obesity.
Health and Fitness
with DS Sports, the teamwear specialists. Experience lightning fast delivery and unbeatable service for all your sporting needs at DS Sports. With gear ready in as little as 5 days. Contact 085 87 15 311 or info@dssports.ie.
Welcome back to the programme. Should sweets be contained in plain packaging as opposed to the colourful wrappers we're used to? Professor Donal O'Shea, obesity lead with the HSE, thinks so. He thinks high sugar foods that are targeted at children should be treated like cigarettes and be in plain packaging. But would it work? Breda Malini is a nutritional therapist. She's also from Belmont in Offaly. She joins me on the show this evening. Breda, what is the appeal in the colourful packaging?
Of course, I mean, you're looking at lots of colour, and children are all attracted to colour, no more than ourselves. You know, and once they see it, then the desire is for there. So, and it's when it's so obvious then as well, it's normally at a till or it's very much at eye level, a lot of these products. So, and then you have the glorious thing of pester power for parents.
So you mentioned the fact that these sweets are at eye level. What kind of impact would that have?
They're at high level. They're drawing the child's attention to it, and children, as I said, are very much attracted to lots of bright colours, and they normally have some sort of possibly a design on the front of it that is very, very attractive to children, and it kind of stimulates children. And the desire to have it then, that kind of just encourages them to want to try it because it's colourful and it's bright. Very possibly it will impact to a certain degree. It's no more than the tax on sugary drinks. You know, it will impact. It will take a while for it actually to kick in, but I'm wondering how companies will deal with it, or because, they have to kind of be on board as well. And if their products are not as attractive, they're not going to sell. And it's going to be a tough one for any health minister to try and change.
Yeah, I'm thinking something along the lines of, do you remember when Coca-Cola did the Name a Bottle campaign where they had names printed on it? I feel like, if they have this plain packaging, a campaign like that, which I imagine cost a bit of money and took a lot of work, wouldn't be possible. You'd imagine it would make life quite difficult for those companies to continue to make those sales.
Absolutely. That's where the problem is going to lie. Why I 100% agree that we are overindulging in too much sugar and too much high ultra processed foods, and that is what's driving the obesity. It's just this high, foods that are full of emulsifiers, additives, colours, etc., which is obviously an awful lot in sweet products and treats and biscuits and all of that, because those things are added to all of that because it makes them cheaper and they give them a long shelf life. So that's, you're up against that as well. So, as I said, companies will find it very difficult to actually do this a change over, and I can see a lot of resistance.
Are there alternative solutions? Maybe not going as far as completely changing the packaging, but is there other ways we could explore that could help steer kids away from the sweets and more towards maybe healthy snacks? What could we do to improve that campaign?
I think it's the understanding of what, because we as parents, as adults, we tend to buy the rubbish of the sweets and the treats and everything else for our children. So I think there's a certain responsibility for us to actually say no and give alternatives. Whereas, I understand that, we'll say, when you go into, depending on budgets and everything else, and, a financial constraint, that when you go into a shop, that what's on offer and what's the cheapest products tends to be the very ultra-processed foods, which contain all of this. So it's a difficult one to navigate, but definitely offering alternatives to the sweet treats and not having the products in your home. If you don't buy it, they're not there. So
and on that same spectrum, the healthy foods tend to be the most expensive by a significant margin as well.
And there's the quandary. Now, there's a lot you can do cheaply, but it is a learning thing. You have to learn how to, kind of prepare meals that are cheaper to actually put together, that are actually nutritious. And also learning how to kind of even batch cook, preparing all of that yourself. And, there is a lot more work into it. But the health benefits is just, that's what you're looking for, is the health benefits for your children, for yourself, because obesity is driving so much in health conditions like type 2 diabetes. There's heart disease, arthritis, stroke, and there's a lot of connection now between the fact that sugar and fructose and that the consumption of that, the high consumption of that is driving cognitive decline and Alzheimer's.
And is that starting at a young age?
Yes. Type 2 diabetes is starting from quite young. Children are developing type 2 diabetes quite young, under 12, some of them, which is such a change from normally, kind of in your 50s, 40s, 50s and things like that. As an adult, you may develop type 2 diabetes, but children are developing it. Now, there is some good things, I have to say. I was looking at some research there for the HSC, and it says that 73% of children are within a healthy weight. Primary school children are within a healthy weight. So that is good. And if we can kind of keep driving that down, or driving it up, whichever, keeping it, increasing the percentage of children that are healthy, we're on a winner there, because healthy children tend to be healthy adults.
And is it as simple as cutting out those sugary foods, the drinks, the sweets, that sort of thing, or is there more to it, in driving down that childhood obesity and even in adulthood as well?
Yeah, I think It's reducing these ultra-processed foods, which are your sweets, your treats, your biscuits. I mean, if you want to look at it, we'll say just for an example, if you had a digestive biscuit, which you count, most people count that as a plain biscuit, okay? You wouldn't have one. You'd have 3 maybe. If you have 3 just regular digestive biscuits, first of all, you're on 8.7 grams of fat and 6.3 grams of sugar. Straight away. That's 3 plain digestive biscuits. So we have to learn to read labels. So the less that's in the food, which is the less ingredients, the better the food is for you. You know, your body has a reaction to ultra-processed foods because there's so much chemicals in them. As I said, emulsifiers, additives, all of that. And the body doesn't know what to do with them. So it tries to deal with it. But for them, it's to try to deal with it. And if they can't deal with it, they can tend to store it. And it stores it in your fat cells. And it creates more fat cells. And it kind of impacts then your insulin resistance. And that adds to the problem. It just kind of builds and builds and builds.
So how do you combat that? Because, naturally going for the digestive biscuits is very much a habit. They're in the press. Yes. You've got, and it tends to strike a lot when you're bored. If you're at home and you're on the couch, you feel almost strange not having something to drink or something to eat while you're watching the television. How do you fight against that?
The biggest thing is, I think, is because we'll say with sugars and snacks and things like that, they are highly addictive, and they are meant to be highly addictive. And then that's the craving start. So you have to try and make sure that you balance your blood sugars. And by doing that, you kind of increase your fibre, increase your protein intake, and that kind of keeps your level of satisfaction or satiety at a good level. And then your blood sugars are not dropping, and then you're not ending up with the craving. Because I think everyone would know what the 11 o'clock slump is and the 3 o'clock slump in the day, and that's when you reach for something. So, and that's what it's got to do an awful lot with kind of keeping your blood sugars balanced. But it is also a habit. We have bad habits. Every one of us has some. So looking at things like, as I said, not having it, first of all, in the house is kind of the biggest thing. That if you don't have it, you can't eat it. So not having it on your shopping list. Doing something different, getting out, getting a bit of fresh air. I think, as you said, boredom or sitting in front of the TV, you expect to be either having a glass of wine or a beer or something, and then you're eating the crisps and the whatever else that goes along with that. So it's just literally breaking the habit. I fear sometimes as well that rather than just you could stop dead, but that can cause a lot of problems depending on the amount of sugar and that sort of thing that you're actually eating. So if you kind of break it down, like we've always done with for Lent, giving up the sugar and the tea, similar plan. Give up something. Say, okay, I'm not buying all of them. I'm going to just buy 1 packet of biscuits, and that's going to be for the week. And just slowly make the change. And use things like your fruits, your nuts, your seeds, almond butter. You can do things like Greek yogurt. We have Glenisc and everything else so locally to us here. Your natural yogurts, all that sort of thing. And make up smoothies. You can do all of that, we'll say, with the real ingredients. And that might just kind of take the edge off all of that.
A very insightful conversation. Breda Malini, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the call.
Nutritional therapist from Belmont, Breda Malini, concludes this evening's show. Thank you so much for listening. David Hollywood should be back on your airwaves next Friday at 7 o'clock. That's if he takes a break from dancing in town parks around the Midlands, of course. Goodbye.